productivity machines are getting smaller, more powerful, and they have less ports. Dang it, I was going for a motif there. Two of the newest and most popular are the MacBook Pro 16 and the Dell XPS 15 9500. If you are looking to upgrade your computer, which of these should you get? Let's find out. See that work too? What's up everyone, I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. I make these videos in a basement and it's freezing down here. That's why I've got the hoodie on. Dang, MacBook versus PC. Things are about to get real in the comments section down below. And full disclosure here, I'm a dual user. Before I got a hold of these two devices, I already had two MacBooks and two Dell laptops currently in my house. I treat these devices like tools. The best one for the job is the one I'll use, so hopefully I'll be pretty agnostic on brand today. To the video. First up, let's quickly cover specs because I'm not a spec head. I'm not gonna get in depth in these spec comparisons or benchmarks because honestly, I don't care. If a device scores 100 points higher on a benchmark, I'm firmly in the meh category. I care about actual use. The MacBook Pro 16 comes equipped with either a 9th generation 6-core i7 for a $2,300 base model or a 9th generation 8-core i9 for a $2,700 higher base model. That's what we got right here. They've just got so many cores on display in the MacBook line. All the models across the spectrum do come equipped with an AMD Radeon Pro 5000 series cards with up to 8 gigabytes of DDR6 memory in the 5500. You can also get up to 64 gigabytes of RAM and a whopping 8 terabyte solid state drive. Dang. But that will give you a crazy expensive laptop. Like, it's pretty shocking. The XPS 15 though has a bit of a wider audience in mind. Here you get the 10th generation quad-core i5 for a $1,300 base model, up to a 10th generation 6-core Intel i7 for their $2,500 top-end base model. The lower end of this spectrum does not come with a dedicated graphic, it just uses the internal graphics on the CPU, but all of the other machines have the NVIDIA GTX 1650 Ti. You can also get up to 64 gigabytes of RAM and a 2 terabyte solid-state drive, but we'll talk more about what you can do and what you can put in this thing in a couple of minutes. I do want to make one note of performance though on the XPS 15. What this means is while you can get a good graphics card inside of here, you won't get the best performance or access to all of the newest NVIDIA NVENC encoding capabilities that the 1660 and up enjoy. So let's start the comparison and let's talk about what I think is one of the most important aspects of a laptop, transportability. Because I mean, honestly, if I want a huge honking computer that can't go anywhere, I'll get a desktop. That's what desktop computers are for. They go on the desktop. Thankfully, both of these are pretty good when it comes to portability. For the size of the devices, both are actually pretty demure and shouldn't have an issue fitting into most standard 15-inch backpacks and cases. I'm looking specifically at the MacBook Pro 16 when I add the most clarifier. But if you are looking for the smallest, most powerful package, the XPS 15 is actually a lot smaller when compared to the 16-inch MacBook Pro. I mean, this is much smaller than I would have thought. I mean, look at that. You can even just like right here, you can see it. Obviously, the MacBook is a 16-inch computer, so it should be bigger. The numbers are bigger, but comparatively, it's larger than you'd think it would be. And I think a lot of credit in this really has to go to the XPS engineering team over at Dell. For a 15-inch laptop, this is surprisingly small. We mentioned this last week, but I have another Dell 15-inch laptop in my house, and it dwarfs the XPS 15. This feels more like a 14-inch laptop or even a beefy 13-inch laptop, which I'm absolutely happy about. I love the size of this computer. It's basically like the perfect size for a travel computer. The MacBook isn't bad. I mean, it's also pretty svelte, and it's not much bigger than other laptops of the same size, but it's just when you compare it against the XPS 15, the difference is really shocking. Like this Dell is, if you get it in your hands, you'll be definitely surprised in the size on hand here. Nothing in this world is free, however, so what do you have to give up to get the small size on display here? Well, if you're an Apple user, congratulations, you've already given up everything over the past few years. Everything, you've given up everything. On display here are 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports, 2 on each side, and 1 headphone jack. So yeah, if you want to get real work done here, you'll definitely need to invest in some dongles or a serious dock. The Dell, if you're a Dell XPS user, you do have to give up a little more now. I mean, you had it good in the last one. Now you got to give up a little bit to get this impressive size. Here, much like the MacBook, you only get Thunderbolt 3 and USB-C, 2 Thunderbolt 3 and 1 USB-C. There is not a USB-A nor an HDMI connector like on previous models. Though in a pretty nice move on Dell's part, you do get a dongle included in the box that has both USB-A and HDMI right on it. You don't have to go out and buy a $60 adapter to get that same functionality. Apple. But the biggest thing, in my opinion, that the Dell XPS holds on to port-wise is the beloved, the magical, heck, the miracle anymore, there's still an SD card slot. I try to talk about this in every single video because I'm so happy to say that it's here. Again, I hate dongles, and as a person that has a large chunk of their income coming from importing footage off an SD card, this is gigantic for me. I've absolutely had problems ingesting footage and had real issues when I've forgotten or my adapter got broken. I would take a slightly larger computer to have this on everything. Everything. SD card slots, man. They win it for me every time. Next up is the typing experience, which is something that I actually critically think is important, and I will, again, much like SD card slots, I will harp about it in every single computer video I make, because it is, it's important. If it wasn't important, I wouldn't talk about it. With the MacBook Pro 16, Apple had finally moved away from their dubious quality butterfly keyboard. This was the first of the new devices with their older and slightly updated switches that they've dubbed the Magic Keyboard, and using it, it's wonderful. Like one of the best typing experiences around that I've ever had. It's good. And the keyboard is properly integrated into the chassis of the laptop body, giving you plenty of wrist and palm space to have a neutral hand position. And that just makes typing on this darn thing wonderful. I do not mean that lightly. It is wonderful. The keys are nice and snappy to use with a good but not too much amount of travel. And I have no complaints. Like I cannot complain about the typing experience here, except for the touch bar. Touch bar still sucks. If you were looking for the best though typing experience, because if you were like me and spend 70% of your day typing and the other 30% in meetings that could have just been typed in an email, the MacBook is a fantastic option. Though that's not to say the XPS 15 is bad. It's not. The keys are spaced out almost as perfectly as the MacBook. It also has a remarkable design that allows for a very neutral and comfortable typing experience. But comparatively, can you hear this? The keys do feel a little mushy when you put them next to the MacBook. It's not terrible, and they do have like a little bit of a spring to them, so it's like they help your fingers get to the next key faster a little bit. That doesn't make any sense, and it didn't make sense when I said it last time, but it's not bad, and it's another of my favorite typing experiences. I think it would come down to how you like your keyboards to feel, because actually both are pretty darn good. Combined with the typing experience, both computers have gigantic trackpads. Look at that. Look at that trackpad. And both have been properly designed so that while you are typing, you won't accidentally move your mouse cursor. They're the biggest trackpads ever, and I love it. The big difference here, though, and we all know what I'm gonna say, is the Apple trackpads, they are the best around right now. It's super precise, the gestures are simple but powerful, and the clicking experience is consistent across the pad. Click at the top, click at the bottom, click around, you will have a consistent clicking experience. The XPS does have the best trackpad that I've ever used on a Windows laptop, but it's a little less precise, and the clicking experience changes depending on like where you click on here. The higher you go, the less it wants to click. And that's not really an XPS problem. All Windows computers that I've ever used are like that, but it's more irritating than I would have realized when you stack it up against the best trackpad. Not something that you would necessarily recognize if you were using this computer by itself, but when compared to the MacBook, it's noticeable. So let's say you buy one of these computers. You're stuck with what you got, right? You can't do anything other than buy another one if you want a little bit more power. Well, that's true for the MacBook. Everything is soldered down and you cannot upgrade this computer. Once you take delivery of this thing, that's what you've got. The Dell actually has some things that you can take into your own hands. For example, you can install your own M.2 NVMe SSD inside of one of the 2 available slots, or in both if you want to set up an SSD RAID inside of your laptop, which is wild to think of. Plus, you can also upgrade your RAM to up to 64 gigabytes, and it's pretty darn easy to do. If you don't believe me, you can see my video on how easy it is. If I can figure it out, you can figure it out, right? Spoilers, it's crazy easy. So easy, and it only takes a few seconds. It's much cheaper and it's much quicker to outpace the MacBook spec-wise, or even a lower end version of the XPS 15. Like, it's really cheap and it's affordable to upgrade these things. One of the negatives that the computers share is they both have a 720p webcam, so Honestly, don't expect too much if you have a bunch of Zoom meetings or family gatherings planned. I mean, the video quality on both is kind of meh. None of these computers has the advantage when it comes to image quality, but I do think the MacBook has actually decent microphones built in, so at least in that circumstance, your family or your coworkers will be able to hear you clearly and hear you pretty well. And as somebody that makes a lot of online content, I can tell you straight up without any hesitation that audio quality will always trump image quality. It's way more important. Another thing the computers share between them design-wise is how their speakers fit into the overall chassis. Both of these computers have their top-firing speakers aligned to both sides of the keyboard. And while I know the MacBook gets celebrated as the king of speakers, it's actually pretty darn good. I do think the XPS 15 isn't too bad either. I think the sound is fuller and richer on the MacBook, but you can only really tell the difference, much like the trackpad, when they're right next to each other. If you only had one of these in isolation, I don't think you'd be able to complain about the audio quality. Now let's talk about one of the more shocking aspects of the XPS 15, the display. This is hands down my favorite display ever made. Sure, this is the 1080p panel compared to the higher resolution Retina display on the MacBook, but look how thin these bezels are. Now, I am not normally one to praise a device for thin bezels. I mean, heck, I like the iPhone SE 2, and it has bezels for days. It has bezels. You could probably take all those bezels and line this computer with them. That's how many bezels it gets. But the bezels here give you a 16:10 display, because they removed it down here on the bottom, and a much smaller laptop overall. So good. The MacBook 16 does have slimmer bezels than its previous models. It's not the same. I wish for the same kind of display as on the XPS on every laptop I use from now on. I cannot get over how good the XPS looks. And from time to time, I'll just like open it up and just look that they're there again. Like, look how good. Oh, I love them. I love them. One of the last few things that I want to talk about today is more and more important the farther you get away from a dedicated power source. Battery and battery life. The XPS 15 actually has a couple of different options when it comes to batteries. The base model i5, which this is, has a 56 watt-hour battery, and the higher configurations come with an 86 watt-hour battery. And as much as I'd like to, I can't really give you specific battery life numbers here because there are also several screen options available. You can get 1080p or a 4K touchscreen, and that 4K screen will drain more battery than the 1080p option. So there's lots of different ways between them. But in my personal experience, I've had all-day battery life out of the 56 watt-hour version in my computer, and that's really what I look for in a device. I look for good enough for one day or one session of use. And then I'll recharge it when I get home or I get back to the hotel or I'm done with that whatever I'm doing. It just has to be good enough. The MacBook though, it's got a 99.9 watt-hour battery. It basically has the biggest battery that they could put in here before the computer wouldn't be allowed on an airplane. And because of that gigantic battery, it also has fantastic battery life. I can easily get a full day out of this, and one of the things that I really like about MacBooks in general is you get the same functionality whether it's plugged into a wall or it's operating on battery power. So if you're editing something, you're editing in the terminal, you have to unplug and you have to keep editing in the plane, you won't have a drop in performance here. And the last thing that I really want to compare these two computers against, as we are now in way too long video territory, oh man, we're getting really close to that record limit, the ecosystem. And look, I get it. I know, I get it. A bunch of people, including myself, recoiled from the screen when I said ecosystem. I get it, but I'm gonna be a little different than I normally would be. The Windows ecosystem is basically every professional computer environment. Professional workflows, servers, remote editing option, almost everything on planet Earth runs on Windows. Like Windows is what runs everything. So from a computer perspective, the Windows ecosystem is better. It just is. I mean, everything uses it. You get more support for applications. You get more support from a lot of stuff. And that's hard to say for somebody that uses a lot of Mac products. But what about your personal ecosystem? Like me, like my own personal devices interacting with each other. That's where Apple wins and what we mean when we say ecosystem. All of my Apple devices work amongst each other seamlessly. AirDrop, Watch authentication, Apple ID updates. It's so seamless, it's really hard to explain if you haven't personally used it. I mean, it would be easy to say like, Gary, you're talking about this magical, it only works for your person, but if you have it and you use it, you will understand. So I will absolutely give Apple the edge on overall personal device ecosystem because I use my Apple Watch and AirPods to run almost every single day, and those work so much better with my Apple computers. I like to run, I gotta get my exercise in while I'm trapped at home. It's important. What about gaming, Gary? You want to ask me about gaming, right? Well, if you were looking to game, buy a Windows PC. That's what I did. Wow, that was a fast comparison. Thanks for saving our time, Gary. But at the end of the day, so what, right? 2,400 words later, which one of these, between the Dell XPS 15 and the MacBook Pro 16, should you actually get? Which one of these wins? And here's where I'm gonna have some trouble making these videos. If you want a Windows machine, you'll prefer the XPS. And if you want a macOS machine, you'll want the MacBook. And I say that as somebody that's personally going through this issue right now as I decide the future of my own personal computing requirements. My big computer's time to update it, and I think it's gonna fall back to my own personal ecosystem, watch, headphones, and I think that's gonna be the big part of what keeps me with the Mac. But I'm really impressed by the XPS 15, and I cannot wait for the XPS 17 to come in. If you are also going through a decision like this, the good part, there is a silver lining here. Either of these computers is a good place to try a new environment out. Windows users would be welcomed by the MacBook 16, and macOS users wanting an SD card slot would feel pretty comfortable on the XPS. So we're all winners here. Hooray, today we all get to be winners. Ding! And if you are looking to save some money on the MacBook and are thinking about buying one refurbished, click on this video to see how the whole refurbished process works and if it's actually worth doing or not. You can find that by clicking right here. Click, 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 click. Thanks for watching.